Goldman had been walking for quite some time. He rarely spent 2 nights in the same place. Everywhere women desired him and made him happy. He was dark from the sun and thin with walking and frugal meals. Many women said farewell in the early hours of the morning and left him, some in tears. Occasionally he thought, why doesn't one of them stay with me? Why, if they love me, and commit adultery for the sake of a single night of love? Why do they all run back to their husbands immediately afterwards, even though most of them are afraid of being beaten? Not one had seriously begged him to stay. Not one had asked him to take her along, had loved him enough to share the joys and hardships of his wandering life. Of course, he had never asked that of any of them, had never even hinted at it to any of them. And when he questioned his heart, he knew that he had cherished his freedom. He could not remember a single woman for whom he had not stopped longing in the arms of the next. Still, it seemed a little odd and sad that love had to be so extremely short-lived wherever he went. His own love as well as that of the women, and that it was satiated as rapidly as it was kindled. Was that how it should be? Was that how it was always and everywhere? Or was it because of him? Was he perhaps fashioned in such a way that women thought him desirable and beautiful, but did not want to be with him longer than the brief, wordless span in the hay or in the moss? Was it because he lived a wanderer's life? Because the settled have a terror of the homeless? Or was it solely because of something in himself, because of him as a person? Did women desire him as they desired a pretty doll to bring to their hearts, only to run back to their husbands afterwards, in spite of the beatings that awaited them? He couldn't tell. He did not grow tired of learning from women. Actually, he felt more drawn to girls, to the very young, as yet without husbands, who knew nothing. With them, he could fall in love longingly. But most young girls were out of reach. They were the cherished ones, timid and well protected. But he also enjoyed learning from the women. Everyone left him something, a gesture, a way of kissing, a particular play, her own special way of giving herself, of holding back. Goldmund gave in to everything. He was as insatiable and pliable as a child, open to every seduction, and only for that reason was he so seductive. His beauty alone would not have been enough to draw women to him so easily. It was his childlike openness, the inquisitive innocence of his desires, his absolute readiness for anything a woman might wish of him. Without knowing it, he was to each woman the lover she had wished for and dreamed of, delicate and patient with one, fast and greedy with another, a boy who experiences love for the first time, or again, artful and knowing. He was ready to play, to wrestle, to sigh and laugh, to be chaste, to be shameless. He did nothing but what the woman desired. Nothing she did not prompt him to do. This was what any woman with intelligent senses soon perceived in him, and it made him their darling. All the time he was learning. In a short time, he learned many kinds of love, many arts of love, absorbed the experiences of many women. He also learned to see them in their multiplicity, how to feel, to touch, to smell them. His ear grew sensitive to every tone of voice. With certain women, a certain tone infallibly told him the type and scope of their amorous capacities. With unending delight, he observed their infinite variety. How the head was fastened to the neck, how the forehead emerged from the roots of the hair, the movement of a knee. He learned to tell one type of hair from another in the dark. Eyes closed, with discreetly probing fingers, one kind of skin, of down from another. Quite soon, he began to notice that the purpose of his wandering lay, perhaps, in this distinguishing, that he was perhaps driven from woman to woman in order to learn and exercise this gift of recognizing and differentiating still more subtly, more profoundly, with greater variation. Perhaps his destiny was to learn to know women and to learn love in 1,000 ways, until he reached perfection. The way some musicians were able to play not only one, but three, four, or a great number of instruments. But to what purpose he knew not, nor where it would lead him. He merely felt that this was his road. He had been able to learn Latin and logic without being particularly gifted for either, but he was gifted for love, for this game with women. Here he had no difficulty learning. He never forgot a thing. Here experience accumulated and classified itself. Goldmund had been walking the roads for a year or two when he came to the homestead of a prosperous knight who had two beautiful young daughters. It was early autumn. Soon the nights would be getting cool. He had had a taste of cold weather during the last autumn and winter, and he was worried about the months ahead. Wandering was difficult in winter. He asked for food and a bed for the night. He was received with courtesy, and when the knight heard that he had studied Greek, he called him away from the servant's table and over to his own, and treated him almost as an equal. The daughters kept their eyes cast down. The older was 18, the younger just 16, Lydia and Julie. The next day, Goldmund wanted to continue on his road. He could not hope to win one of these beautiful blonde young ladies, and there were no other women who might have enticed him to stay. But after breakfast, the knight drew him aside and led him to a room furnished for a special purpose. Modestly, the old man told the young one of his weakness for learning and books, and showed him a small chest filled with scrolls he had collected, a writing desk he had built for himself, and a stock of the most exquisite paper and parchment. By and by, Goldmund learned that this pious knight had been a scholar in his youth, but had completely abandoned his studies for the sake of warfare and worldly affairs until, during a grave illness, God had prompted him to go on a pilgrimage and repent the sins of his youth. He had traveled as far as Rome and Constantinople, had found his father dead upon his return, the house empty, had settled down then and married, lost his wife, raised his daughters, and now, at the beginning of old age, he had begun to write a detailed account of his long past pilgrimage. He had written several chapters, but as he confessed to the young man, his Latin was somewhat faulty. It held him up constantly. He offered Goldmund new clothes and free shelter if he agreed to correct and copy out all that had been written so far, and also to help him complete the book. Goldmund knew the realities of wandering in the cold, nor were new clothes to be scorned either. But most of all, the young man enjoyed the prospect of staying in the same house with the two beautiful sisters for many months to come. Without another thought, he said yes. A few days later, the housekeeper was asked to unlock the wardrobe, and in it they found a bolt of fine brown cloth, from which a suit and cap were ordered for Goldmund. The knight had fancied black, a kind of scholar's gown, but his guest would not hear of it and knew how to coax until a handsome-looking outfit, half out of a page, half that of a huntsman, was made for him. It suited him well. His Latin was not too rusty either. Together they went over all that had been written. Goldmund not only corrected the many imprecise, faulty expressions, he also rounded out the knight's clumsy, short sentences here and there, and made them into pleasing Latin constructions, with solid grammar and neat consecutive tenses. It gave the knight great pleasure, and he was not stingy with praise. Every day they worked at least 2 hours. Goldmund had no trouble passing his time in the castle, which was in reality a spacious, fortified farmhouse. He went hunting, and huntsman Heinrich taught him how to use a crossbow. He made friends with the dogs and was allowed to ride as much as he pleased. He was rarely alone. He'd either be talking to a dog or a nag, or to Heinrich or Leah, the housekeeper, a fat old woman with a man's voice, who liked to laugh and a jest, or the kennel boy or a shepherd. It would have been easy for him to start a love intrigue with the miller's wife who lived close by, but he held himself aloof and played innocent. He took great joy in the knight's 2 daughters. The younger was the more beautiful, but so prim she hardly spoke to Goldmund. He treated both of them with great respect and courtesy. but both felt his presence to be a continuous courtship. The younger one shut herself off completely, stubborn with shyness. Lydia, the older, found a special tone for him, treated him with a mixture of respect and mockery, as though he were a monster of learning. She asked him many curious questions, and also about his life in the cloister, but there was always a slight irony in her tone, and the superiority of the lady. He gave in to everything, treated Lydia like a lady, and Julie like a little nun. And whenever his conversation detained the girls a little longer than usual at the table after meals, or if Lydia spoke to him outside the house, in the yard, or in the garden, and permitted herself to tease him, he was content and felt that he was making progress. That autumn, the leaves stayed late on the tall ash in the courtyard, and there were still asters in the garden and roses. One day visitors arrived. A neighbor with his wife and horseman came riding in. The mildness of the day had tempted them to travel farther than usual. Now they were there and asked shelter for the night. They were courteously received. Goldmund's bed was moved out of the guest room into the writing room. His room was made up for the visitors. Chickens were killed. Servants ran to the mill pond to get fish. With pleasure, Goldmund took part in the festivities and the excitement. He immediately felt the unknown lady's awareness of him. And as soon as he noticed her interest in him and her desire, by a certain something in her voice and in her eyes, he also noticed with growing interest how changed Lydia was, how silent and remote she became, and how she sat watching him and the unknown lady. During the elaborate dinner, the lady's foot came to play with Goldmund's under the table. He took great delight in this game, but still greater delight in the brooding, silent tension with which Lydia watched it, with inquisitive, burning eyes. Finally, he dropped a knife on purpose, bent down to reach for it under the table, and touched the lady's foot and calf with a caressing hand. He saw Lydia turn pale and bite her lip as he continued to tell anecdotes from his cloister days, and felt the unknown lady listen intently, not so much to his stories as to the wooing in his voice. The others, too, sat listening. His master with benevolence, the guests with a stony face, although he, too, was affected by the fire that burned in the young man. Lydia had never heard him speak this way. He had blossomed. Lust hung in the air. His eyes shone. Ecstasy sang in his voice. Love pleaded. The three women felt it, each in her own fashion. Little Julie with violent resistance and rejection, the knight's wife with radiant satisfaction, and Lydia with a painful commotion in her heart, a mixture of deep longing, soft resistance, and the most violent jealousy, which made her face look narrow and her eyes burn. Goldmund felt all those waves. Like secret answers to his courtship, they came flooding back to him. Like birds, thoughts of love fluttered about him, giving in, resisting, fighting each other. After the meal, Julie withdrew. Night had long since fallen. With her candle and a clay candlestick, she left the hall, frigid as a little cloister woman. The others stayed up for another hour, and while the two men discussed the harvest, the emperor, and the bishop, Lydia listened ardently to the idle chatter that was being spun between Goldmund and the unknown lady, among the loose threads of which a thick, sweet net of give and take, of glances and intonations and small gesture had come into being, each one overcharged with meaning, overheated with desire. Greedily, the girl drank in the atmosphere, but also felt disgust when she saw, or sensed, Goldmund touch the unknown lady's knee under the table. She felt the contact on her own flesh and gave a start. Afterward, she could not fall asleep and lay listening half the night, with pounding heart, sure that the two would come together. In her imagination, she performed what was denied to them, saw them embrace, heard their kisses, trembling with excitement, all the while, wishing, as much as fearing, that the betrayed knight might surprise the lovers and sink his wife into the odious Goldmund's heart. Sink his knife. The next morning, the sky was overcast. A wet wind blew. The guests declined all urging to stay longer and insisted on immediate departure. Lydia stood by while the guests mounted. She shook hands and spoke words of farewell, but she was not aware of what she was doing. All her senses were focused in her eyes as she watched the knight's wife place her foot in Goldmund's preferred hands, watched his right hand wrap around the shoe, wide and firm, and clutch the woman's foot forcefully for an instant. The strangers had ridden off. Goldmund was in the study working. Half an hour later, he heard Lydia's voice giving orders under the window, heard a horse being led from the stable, his master stepping to the window, looking down, smiling, shaking his head. Then both watched Lydia ride out of the courtyard. They seemed to be making less progress in their Latin composition today. Goldmund was distracted. With a friendly word, his master released him earlier than usual. No one saw Goldmund sneak a horse out of the courtyard. He rode against the cool, wet wind into the discolored landscape, galloping faster and faster. He felt the horse grow warm under him, felt his own blood catch fire. He rode through the gray day, across stubble fields, heath, and swampy spots overgrown with shaved grass and reeds. Breathed deeply, crossed small valleys of alder, rotting pine forest, and once again, brownish bare heath. On the high ridge of a hill, sharply outlined against the pale gray, cloudy sky, he saw Lydia's silhouette, sitting high on her slowly trotting horse. He raced towards her. He saw that he was following her and spurred her horse and fled. She would appear and then disappear, her hair flowing behind her. He gave chase as though she were a fox. His heart laughed. With brief, tender calls, he encouraged his horse, scanned the landscape with happy eyes as he flew past low, crouching fields, an alder forest, maples, the clay-covered banks of ponds. Again and again, his eyes returned to his target, to the beautiful fleeing woman. Soon he would catch up with her. When Lydia saw that he was close, she abandoned the race and let her horse walk. She did not turn her head to look at her pursuer. Proudly, apparently casually, she trotted ahead of him as though nothing had happened, as though she were alone. He pushed his horse up to hers. The two horses walked gently side by side, but the animals and their riders were hot from the chase. "Lydia," he called softly. There was no answer. "Lydia." She remained silent. "How beautiful that was, Lydia, to watch you ride from a distance, your hair trailing after you like a golden flash of lightning. That was so beautiful. How wonderful of you to flee from me. That's when I realized that you cared for me a little. I didn't know. I doubted until last night. But when you tried to flee from me suddenly, I understood. You must be tired, my beauty, my love. Let's dismount." He jumped from his horse, seizing the reins of her horse in the same motion to keep from galloping off once more. Her snow-white face looked down at him. He lifted her from her saddle. She broke into tears. Carefully, he led her a few steps, made her sit down in the wilted grass, and knelt beside her. There she sat, fighting her sobs. She fought bravely and overcame them. "Oh, why are you so bad?" she began when she was able to speak. She could hardly utter the words. "Am I so bad?" "You are a seducer of women, Goldmund. Let me forget those words you said to me. They were impudent words. It does not become you to speak to me that way. How can you imagine that I care for you? Let us forget that. But how am I to forget the things I was forced to see last night?" "Last night? But what did you see last night?" "Oh, stop pretending. Don't lie like that. It was horrible and shameless, the way you played up to that woman under my eyes. Have you no shame? You even stroked her leg under the table, under our table, before me, before my eyes. And now that she's gone, you come chasing after me. You really don't know what shame means." Goldmund had long since regretted the words he had said before lifting her off her horse. How stupid of him. Words were unnecessary in love. She should have kept silent. He said no more. He knelt by her side. She looked at him, so beautiful and unhappy that her misery became his misery. He, too, felt that there was something to be deplored, but in spite of all she had said, he still saw love in her eyes, and the pain on her quivering lips was also love. He believed her eyes more than he believed her words. But she had expected an answer. As it was not forthcoming, Lydia's lips took on an even more bitter expression. She looked at him somewhat tearfully and repeated, "Have you really no shame?" "Forgive me," he said humbly. "We're talking about things that should not be talked about. It is my fault, forgive me. You ask if I have no shame. Yes, I have shame, but I also love you, and love knows no shame. Don't be angry with me." She seemed hardly to hear him. She sat with a bitter mouth, looking into the distance, as though she were alone. He had never been in such a situation. This was the result of using words. Gently, he laid his face against her knee. Immediately, the contact made things better. Yet he felt a little confused and sad, and she too seemed to be sad. She sat motionless, saying nothing, looking into the distance. All this embarrassment and sadness, but the knee accepted his leaning cheek with friendliness. It did not reject him. Eyes closed, his face lay on her knee. Slowly, it took the knee's noble shape. With joy and emotion, Goldmund thought how much this knee, with its distinguished youthful form, corresponded to her long, beautiful, neatly rounded fingernails. Gratefully, he embraced the knee, let his cheek and mouth speak to it. Now he felt her hand posing itself, bird-like and fearful, on his hair. Dear hand, he could feel her softly, childishly stroke his hair. Many times before, he had examined her hand in great detail and admired it. He knew it almost as well as his own, the long, slender fingers with their long, beautifully rounded pink nails. Now the long, delicate fingers were having a timid conversation with his curls. Their language was childlike and fearful, but it was love. Gratefully, he nestled his head into her hand, feeling her palm with his neck, with his cheeks. Then she said, "It's time, we must go." He raised his head and looked at her tenderly. Gently, he kissed her slender fingers. "Please get up," she said. "We must go home." He obeyed instantly. They stood up, mounted, rode. Goldmund's heart was filled with joy. How beautiful Lydia was. How like a child, pure and delicate. He had not even kissed her, and yet he felt so showered with gifts by her and fulfilled. They rode briskly. Only at their arrival a few yards before the entrance to the court, she grew fearful and said, "We shouldn't have both come back at the same time. How foolish we are." And at that last moment, while they dismounted and a servant came running, she whispered quickly and hotly in his ear, "Tell me if you were with that woman last night." He shook his head many times and began unsaddling the horse. In the afternoon, after her father had gone out, she appeared in the study. "Is it really true?" she asked at once and with passion. He knew what she meant. "But then, why did you play with her like that, in that disgusting fashion, and make her fall in love with you?" "That was for you," he said. "Believe me, I would have 1,000 times rather caress your foot than hers. But your foot never came to me under the table. It never asked me if I love you." "Do you really love me, Goldmund?" "Yes, indeed. But what will happen?" "I don't know, Lydia, nor do I worry about it. It makes me happy to love you. I don't think of what will happen. I am happy when I see you ride, and when I hear your voice, and when your fingers caress my hair. I'll be happy when you allow me to kiss you. A man is only allowed to kiss his bride, Goldmund. Have you never thought of that?" "No, I have never thought of that. Why should I? You know as well as I that you cannot become my bride." "That's true. And since you cannot become my husband and stay with me forever, it is very wrong of you to speak to me about love." Did you think that you'd be able to seduce me?" "I thought and believed nothing, Lydia. I think much less than you imagine. I wish nothing except that you might wish to kiss me." We talk so much. Lovers don't do that. I think you don't love me. This morning you said just the opposite. And you did just the opposite. I? What do you mean? First you fled before me when you saw me. Then, when I thought that you loved me, then you cried, and I thought that was because you loved me. Then my head lay on your knee, and you caressed me, and I thought that was love. But now you're not behaving in a loving manner with me. I'm not like that woman whose foot you stroked yesterday. You seem to be accustomed to women like that. No, thank God, you're much more beautiful and refined than she is. That's not what I meant. Oh, but it's true. Don't you know how beautiful you are? I have a mirror. Have you ever looked at your forehead in the mirror, Lydia? And at your shoulders, at your fingernails, at your knees? And have you ever noticed how each part blends into and rhymes with each part? How they all have the same shape, an elongated, taut, firm, very slender shape. Have you noticed that? The way you talk. I've never noticed that, actually, but now that you say it, I do know what you mean. Listen, you really are a seducer. Now you're trying to make me vain. What a shame that I can do nothing right with you. Why should I be interested in making you vain? You're beautiful, and I'd like to try to show you that I'm grateful for your beauty. You force me to tell you with words. I could say it 1,000 times better without words. With words, I can give you nothing. With words, I can't learn from you, nor you from me. What is there for me to learn from you? For me from you, Lydia, and for you from me. But you don't want to. You only want to love the man whose bride you'll be. He'll laugh when he discovers that you haven't learned anything, not even how to kiss. So you wish to give me kissing lessons, you learned man. He smiled at her. He didn't like her words, but he could sense her girlhood from being her slightly brusque, false ringing talk. From behind her slightly brusque, false ringing talk, he could sense desire taking possession of her and fear fighting against it. He gave no answer. He smiled at her, caught her restless glance in his eyes, and while she surrendered to the spell, not without resistance, he slowly brought his face close to hers until their lips met. Gently he brushed her mouth. It answered with a little childlike kiss and opened, as though in painful surprise, when he did not let it go. Gently courting, he followed her retreating mouth until it hesitatingly came back to meet his, and then he taught the spellbound girl without violence the receiving and giving of a kiss, until, exhausted, she pressed her face against his shoulder. There he let it rest, smelled with delight her thick blonde hair, murmured tender, calming sounds into her ear, and remembered how he, an ignorant pupil, had once been introduced to the sweet Lise, the gypsy. How black her hair had been, how brown her skin, how the sun had burned down on him, how the wilting John's wort had smelled, and how far back it was. From the distance it came flashing across his memory. That was how fast everything wilted. It had hardly time to bloom. Slowly, Lydia stood up straight. Her face was transformed. Her loving eyes looked large and earnest. Let me go, Goldmund, she said. I've stayed with you so long, my love. Every day they found their secret hour, and Goldmund let himself be guided in everything by her. This girlish love touched and delighted him most wonderfully. Sometimes she'd only hold his hand in hers for a whole hour and look into his eyes and depart with a child's kiss. Other times, on the contrary, she'd kiss him insatiably, but would not permit him to touch her. Once, deeply blushing and struggling with herself, she let him see one of her breasts, with the intention of giving him a great joy. Timidly, he brought the small white fruit out of her dress. He knelt and kissed it, and she carefully covered it up again, still blushing all the way down to her neck. They also spoke, but in a new way, differently than on the first day. They invented names for each other. She liked to tell him about her childhood, her dreams and games. She also often said that her love was wrong since he could not marry her. Sadly and with resignation, she spoke of it and draped her love with the secrecy of the sadness, as with a black veil. For the time, Goldmund felt not only desired by a woman, but loved. Once Lydia said, "You are so handsome and you look so happy, but deep inside your eyes there is no gaiety, there is only sorrow. And though your eyes knew that happiness did not exist, and that all is beautiful and lovely does not stay with us long, you have the most beautiful eyes of anyone I know and the saddest. I think that's because you're homeless. You came to me out of the woods, and one day you'll go off again and sleep on moss and walk on the roads. But where is my home when you go away? I'll still have my father and my sister in my room and a window where I can sit and think of you, but I'll no longer have a home." He'd let her talk. Sometimes he'd smile at her words, and sometimes he'd grow sad. He never consoled her with words, only with gentle caresses, only by holding her head against his chest, humming soft, meaningless magic sounds that nurses hum to comfort children when they cry. Once Lydia said, "I'd really like to know what will become of you, Goldmund. I often think of it. You have no ordinary life, and it won't be easy. Oh, I hope you'll do well. Sometimes I think you ought to become a poet, a man who has visions and dreams and knows how to describe them beautifully. Ah, you wander over the whole world, and all women will love you, and yet you'll always remain alone. You'd better go back to the cloister to your friend of whom you've told me so much. I'll pray for you that you will not be made to die alone in the forest." She'd speak that way in deep earnest, with lost eyes, but then again she'd ride laughingly with him across the late autumn land, or ask him funny riddles, or throw dead leaves and shiny acorns at him. At night, Goldmund was lying in his bed in his room, waiting for sleep. His heart was heavy with a soft pain, full and heavy. It was beating in his chest, brimming over with love and with grief. He didn't know what to do. He heard the November wind rattle at the roof. He had grown accustomed to lying like that for quite some time before falling asleep. Sleep would not come. Softly, as was his custom in the evening, he intoned the chant to the Virgin, Tu advocata peccatorum, et macula originalis non est in te. Tu lectata Israel, tu advocata peccatorum. With its soft music, the song sank into his soul, but at the same time the wind sang outside, a song of strife and wandering, of wood, autumn, of the life of the homeless. He thought of Lydia and of Narcissus and his mother. Full and heavy was his restless heart. Suddenly he started and stared, not believing. The door of his room had opened. In the dark, a figure in a long white gown came in. Soundlessly, Lydia came walking on bare feet across the stone floor, gently closed the door, and sat down on his bed. "Lydia," he whispered, "my little doe, my white flower. Lydia, what are you doing?" "I've come to you only for an instant," she said. "Just once. I wanted to see my Goldmund in his bed, my gold heart." She lay down beside him. They didn't move. Their hearts were beating heavily. She let him kiss her, let his admiring hands play with her body, but more was not permitted. After a short while, she gently pushed his hands away, kissed him on the eyes, got up soundlessly, and vanished. The door creaked, the wind tinkled and thumped the attic. Everything was under a spell, full of secrecy and anguish, promise and menace. Goldmund did not know what he was thinking, what he was doing. When he woke again after a troubled slumber, his pillow was wet with tears. A few nights later she came back. The sweet white ghost lay down beside him for 15 minutes, as she had the last time. In whispers she spoke into his ear as she lay folded in his arms. She had much to tell, much to complain about. Tenderly he listened. She was lying on his left arm. His right hand caressed her knees. "Little Goldmouth," she said in a completely muffled voice near his cheek. It is so sad that I may never belong to you. Our small happiness won't last much longer, our small secret. Julie is already suspicious. Soon she'll force me to tell her, or my father will notice. If he found me in here in your bed, my little golden bird, your Lydia would fare ill. With tear-swollen eyes, she would stand and look up to the trees to see her lover hang high up there, swaying in the wind. Oh, you had better run away right now. Right now would be best, rather than let my father have you bound and hanged. I saw a man hanged once, a thief. I could not bear. I could not bear to see you hanged. You had better run away and forget me. I don't want you to die, my golden one. I don't want the birds to hack out your blue eyes. Oh no, my treasure, you must go away. What am I to do if you leave me all alone? Won't you come with me, Lydia? We'll flee together. The world is wide. That would be wonderful, she sighed. Oh, so wonderful to wander into the world with you. But I can't. I can't sleep in the forest and be homeless and have straw in my hair. I can't do that. Nor can I bring such shame upon my father. No, don't speak. That's not just my imagination. I can't. I couldn't do it any more than eat off a dirty plate or sleep in a leper's bed. Everything good and beautiful is forbidden us. We both were born for sadness. My golden one, my poor little boy. I should have to see you hanged after all, and I'll be locked up in my room and later sent to a convent. You must leave me alone, sweetheart, and sleep with the gypsies again and the peasant women. Oh, leave before they catch you and bind you. We'll never be happy, never. Softly, he stroked her knee, touched her sex very delicately, and begged, my little flower, we could be so happy. Won't you let me? Not angrily, but firmly, she pushed his hand aside and drew away slightly. No, she said. No, I won't let you. It is forbidden me. Perhaps you can't understand that, you little gypsy. I am doing wrong. I am a bad girl. I am bringing shame upon the whole house. But somewhere inside my soul, I still have pride, and nobody may enter there. You must let me keep that, or else I can never come again to your room. He would never have ignored an interdiction, a wish, a hint from her. He himself was surprised that she had so much power over him. But he was suffering. His senses remained stirred up. Often his heart fought violently against his dependence. Sometimes he made efforts to free himself. Sometimes he'd court little Julie with elaborate flattery, and it was indeed the most important to remain on good terms with this powerful person and to dupe her if possible. He had a strange relationship with this little Julie, who often behaved like a child and often seemed omniscient. She really had more beauty than Lydia, an extraordinary beauty which, combined with her somewhat precocious child innocence, was a great attraction for Goldmund. He was often deeply in love with Julie. In this strong attraction he felt for the little sister. He recognized with surprise the difference between loving and desiring. In the beginning, he had looked at both sisters with the same eyes, had found both desirable, but Julie, more beautiful and seductive, had courted both equally. Always kept an eye on both, and now Lydia had gained this power over him. Now he loved her so much that he had even renounced full possession of her out of love. Her soul had become familiar and dear to him. In its childlike tenderness and inclination to sadness, it seemed similar to his own. He was often deeply astonished and delighted to see how much her own soul corresponded to her body. She'd do something, say something, express a wish or an opinion, and her words and the attitude of her soul were molded in the same shape as the slant of her eyes and the form of her fingers. These instants during which he thought he recognized the basic forms and laws that constituted her being, her soul as well as her body, had more than once roused in Goldmund the desire to retain something of this form and to recreate it. On a few sheets of paper that he kept most secret, he had made several attempts to draw from memory the outline of her head with the strokes of pen, the line of her eyebrows, her hand, her knee. With young Julie, the situation was becoming rather difficult. She obviously sensed the wave of love in which the older sister was swimming, and her senses turned toward this paradise with curiosity and greed, while her stubborn mind refused to admit it. She treated Goldmund with exaggerated coolness and dislike. Yet, during moments of forgetfulness, she'd watch him with admiration and desiring curiosity. With Lydia, she was most often tender, and occasionally even came to visit her in her bed, to breathe in the atmosphere of love and sex with wordless greed, purposely brushing against the forbidden and longed for secret. Then again, she'd make clear, with almost offensive brusqueness, that she knew of Lydia's secret transgression and felt contempt for it. Attractive and disturbing, the beautiful, capricious child flitted between two lovers, tasted of love's secrecy and thirsty dreams, played innocent, and then again dangerously knowing. The child rapidly gained a kind of power over them. Lydia suffered from it more than Goldmund, who rarely saw the younger sister except during meals. And Lydia also realized that Goldmund was not insensitive to Julie's charms. Sometimes she'd see his appreciative, delighted eyes gazing at her. She could not say anything about it. Everything was so complicated, so filled with danger. Julie must especially not be offended or angered. Alas, any day, any hour, the secret of her love could be discovered, and an end put to her heavy, anguished bliss, perhaps a dreadful end. Sometimes Goldmund asked himself why he had not left long ago. It was difficult to live the way he was living now. Loved, but without hope for either a sanctioned, lasting happiness or the easy fulfillments to which his love desires had been accustomed until now. His senses were constantly excited and hungry, never stilled, moreover. He lived in permanent danger. Never stilled, moreover, he lived in permanent danger. Why was he staying and accepting it all? All these entanglements and confused emotions. These were experiences, emotions, and states of mind for the sedentary, the lawful, for people in heated rooms. Had he not the right of the homeless, of the non-possessing, to extricate himself from these delicate complications and to laugh at them? Yes, he had that right, and he was a fool to look for a kind of home here and to be paying for it with so much suffering, so much embarrassment. And yet he did. He did not only put up with it, but was secretly happy to do it. It was foolish, difficult, a strain to live this way, but it was also wonderful. The darkly beautiful sadness of his love was wonderful, and its foolishness and hopefulness, his sleepless, thought-filled nights were beautiful. It was all beautiful and delectable as the fold of suffering on Lydia's lips, or like the lost, resigned tone of her voice when she spoke of her love and sorrow. In a few weeks, lines of suffering had appeared on Lydia's young face. It seemed so beautiful and so important to him to retrace the lines of this face with a pen. And he felt himself had become another person in these few weeks, much older, not more intelligent, yet more experienced, not happier, yet more mature, much richer in his soul. He was no longer a boy. In her gentle, lost voice, Lydia said to him, "You mustn't be sad, not because of me. I want to bring you only joy, to see you happy. Forgive me, I've made you sad. I've infected you with my fears and my grief. I have such strange dreams at night. I'm always walking in a desert. It is vast and dark. I can't tell you how vast and dark. And I walk there looking for you, but you're not there. And I know that I have lost you, and that I'll have to walk like that forever and ever, alone like that. Then I wake up and think, oh, how good, how wonderful that he's still here, that I'll see him, perhaps for many weeks more or days. It doesn't matter. It only matters that he's still here." One morning, Goldmund awoke shortly after dawn and continued to lie in his bed for a while, musing. Images from a dream hovered about him, disconnected. He had dreamed of his mother and of Narcissus. He could still see both figures clearly as he extricated himself from the strands of the dream. A peculiar light caught his attention. A strange kind of brightness was filtering through the small window. He jumped up, ran to the window, and saw that the windowsill, the roof of the stable, the gate to the courtyard, the entire landscape beyond was shimmering bluish white. covered by the first snow of winter. He was struck by the contrast between his agitated heart and the quiet, resigned winter landscape. How quiet, how gracefully and piously field and forest, hill and heath gave in to sun, wind, rain, draft, and snow. How beautifully and gently maple and ash bore the burden of winter. Could one not become as they? Could one learn nothing from them? Deep in thought, he walked out to the courtyard, waded in the snow, touched it with his hands, went into the garden, and looked over the high snow-covered fence at the snow-bent rose branches. As they ate their gruel for breakfast, everybody mentioned the first snow. Everyone, even the girls, had already been outside. Snow had come late this year. Christmas was not far off. The night spoke about the lands to the south that were strangers to snow. But the event that made this first winter day unforgettable for Goldmund occurred long after nightfall. The two sisters had quarreled during the day, but Goldmund knew nothing of it. At night, after the house had grown quiet and dark, Lydia came to his room in accord with her custom. Wordlessly, she lay down beside him, leaned her head against his chest to hear his heartbeat, and to console herself with his nearness. She was sad and full of apprehension. She feared that Julie might betray her, yet she could not make up her mind to speak to her lover about it and to cause him sorrow. She was lying quietly against his heart, listening to the tender words he whispered to her from time to time, feeling his hand in her hair. But suddenly, she had not been lying there for very long. She had a terrible shock and sat up, her eyes growing wide. Goldmund was also greatly frightened when he saw the door of his room open and a figure enter. His shock kept him from recognizing immediately who it was. Only when the apparition stood close behind his bed and went over it did he recognize with anguish in his heart that it was Julie. Ooh. She slipped out of the coat she had thrown over her nightgown and let it drop to the floor. With a cry of pain, as though cut by a knife, Lydia sank back and clung to Goldmund. In a mocking, triumphant, though shaking voice, Julie said, "I don't enjoy being in my room by myself all the time. Either you take me with you and we lie together, all three of us, or I go and wake father." "Well, come in then," said Goldmund, folding back the cover. "You'll freeze your feet off there." She climbed in, and he had trouble making room for her in the narrow bed, because Lydia had buried her face in the pillow and was lying motionless. Finally, all three of them were in the bed, a girl on each side of Goldmund. For a second, he could not resist the thought that not so long ago the situation corresponded to his most secret wishes. With strange anguish and secret delight, he felt Julie's hip against his side. "I just had to see," she began again, "how it feels to lie in your bed, since my sister enjoys coming here so much." In order to calm her, Goldmund softly rubbed his cheek against her hair and caressed her hip and knee with a quiet hand, the way one caresses a cat. Silent and curious, she surrendered to his probing hand, felt the magic with curious reverence, offered no resistance. But while he cast a spell, he also took pains to comfort Lydia, hummed soft, familiar love sounds into her ear, and finally made her lift her face and turned it toward him. Soundlessly, he kissed her mouth and eyes, while his hand kept her sister spellbound on the other side. He was aware how embarrassing and grotesque the whole situation was. It was becoming almost unbearable. It was his left hand that taught him the truth. While it explored the beautiful, quietly waiting body of Julie, he felt for the first time not only the deep hopelessness of his love for Lydia, but how ridiculous it was. While his lips were with Lydia and his hand with Julie, he felt that he should either force Lydia to give in to him, or he should leave. To love her and yet renounce her had been wrong, had been nonsense. "My heart," he whispered into Lydia's ear. "We are suffering unnecessarily. How happy all three of us could be now. Let us do what our blood demands." She drew back, shrinking, and his desire fled to the other girl. His hand was doing such pleasing things to Julie that she answered with a long, quivering sigh of lust. Lydia heard the sigh, and her heart contracted with jealousy, as though poison had been dropped into it. She sat up abruptly, tore the cover off the bed, jumped to her feet, and cried, "Julie, let's leave." Julie was startled. The thoughtless violence of Lydia's cry, which might betray them all, showed her the danger. Silently she got up. But Goldmund, offended and betrayed in all his senses, quickly put his arms around Julie as she sat up, kissed her on each breast, and hotly whispered into her ear, "Tomorrow, Julie, tomorrow." Barefoot in her nightgown, Lydia stood up on the stone floor, her feet blue with cold. She picked up Julie's coat and hung it around her sister with a gesture of suffering and submission that did not escape Julie in spite of the darkness. It touched and reconciled her. Softly the sisters vanished from the room with conflicting emotions. Goldmund listened intently and breathed with relief as the house remained deathly quiet. The three young people were forced to meditate in solitude over their strange and unnatural association. The two sisters found nothing to say to each other. After they hurried back to their bedroom, they lay awake in their respective beds, each alone, silent and stubborn. A spirit of grief, contradiction, nonsense, alienation, and innermost confusion seemed to have taken hold of the house. Goldmund did not fall asleep until after midnight. Julie not until the early hours of morning. Lydia lay tortuously awake until the pale day rose over the snow. Then she got dressed, knelt for a long time in prayer before the small wooden savior in her room, and as soon as she heard her father's step on the stairs, went out and asked him to hear her. Without trying to distinguish between her fears for Julie's virginity and her own jealousy, she had decided during the night to put an end to the matter. Goldmund and Julie were still asleep when the knight was informed of everything Lydia had decided to tell him. She did not mention Julie's part in the adventure. When Goldmund appeared in the writing room at the usual hour that morning, he found the knight in boots, vest, and girdle sword instead of the slippers and housecoat he usually wore while they wrote. At once he knew the meaning of this. "Put on your cap," said the knight. "I have a walk to take with you." Goldmund took his cap from the nail and followed his master down the stairs, across the courtyard, and out the gate. Their soles made crunching noises on the slightly frozen snow. The sky was still red with dawn. The knight walked ahead in silence. The young man followed. Several times he looked back at the house, at the window of his room, at the steep, snow-covered roof, until all disappeared and there was nothing more to see. He would never see that roof, those windows again. Never again. The study, the bedroom, the two sisters. He had so often toyed with the thought of sudden departure. Now his heart contracted with pain, and it hurt bitterly to leave this way. For an hour they walked in this fashion, the master going on ahead. Neither spoke, and Goldmund began to think about his fate. The knight was armed. Perhaps he would kill him. But he did not believe that he would. The danger was small. He'd only have to run, and the old man would stand there helpless with his sword. No, his life was not in danger. But this silent walking behind the offended, solemn man, this being led away wordlessly, pained him more with every step. Finally the knight halted. "From here on," he said in a broken voice, "you will continue alone, always in the same direction. You'll lead the wanderer's life you did before. If you ever show your face again in the neighborhood of my house, you will be killed. I have no desire to take revenge on you. I should have been more intelligent than to allow a young man to live intimately with my daughters. But if you have the audacity to come back, your life is lost. Go now, and may God forgive you." As he stood in the shallow light of the snowy morning, his gray-bearded face looked almost dead. Like a ghost he stood there, and did not move until Goldmund had disappeared over the next ridge. The reddish tint in the cloudy sky had faded. The sun did not come out, and snow began to fall in thin, hesitant flakes.